Hello, and welcome to another episode of Decentral Lounge, brought to you by Global Stake, your institutional SOC 2 certified, truly decentralized bare metal staking service provider. Today, we're thrilled to discuss Babylon, a pioneering project that's bringing staking to the Bitcoin ecosystem. Joining us, we have the co-founder, David Say, of Babylon, and a professor at Stanford University. This team's work is redefining what's possible with Bitcoin by introducing mechanisms that not only enhance its utility, but also empower users to earn rewards in new ways. I first personally heard of Babylon nearly 2 years ago when I attended the Shared Security Summit at ETH Denver in 2023. I was instantly intrigued by the idea of Bitcoin timestamping and the additional security it could provide proof-of-stake networks. Fast forward to today, Babylon is challenging the traditional boundaries of Bitcoin by integrating staking features typically seen in proof-of-stake networks. With a focus on leveraging Bitcoin's security and network effects, Babylon is working to unlock additional value and opportunities for Bitcoin holders and the broader Web3 industry. We're excited to learn more about David's journey, the technical and economic nuances of Bitcoin staking, and what the future holds for this groundbreaking initiative. Thanks so much for being here, David. Let's just jump in, starting off by how did you get involved in Web3 to begin with? Like, how does one go from Stanford University to the world of Web3?
Yeah, hey, Ryan. So great to be here. I got into Web3 6 years ago as a researcher. So I'm trained as a researcher. I'm also a professor at Stanford University, as you mentioned. So I've always been doing research. That's my whole career. In fact, I started my career doing research in wireless communication infrastructure. Those were the early days of 3G, 4G, 5Gs. Unfortunately, I'm dating myself right now telling you all this information, but it is what it is. So, what I found in my long history of research in infrastructure is that the biggest impact happened when it's in the early days of the development of an infrastructure. So I started research very lucky when wireless was just starting. It was a time when only a few million people have cell phones. And you can see a technology within a span of 15, 20 years went from a few million to a few billion. We're talking about three more zeros. And that is, in some sense, the moment where my research has really a lot of impact. In fact, every time you use a cell phone, I have to say, you're using an algorithm that I've developed. And everybody uses that algorithm, actually, every cell phone. So that was the level of impact that I could make because it was early, because the technology was early. I got in at the basement level, so to speak. But now, fast forward to around 6-7 years ago, at that point, wireless was already quite mature. And so I was looking for a new research direction. And then I stumbled upon this white paper by Nakamoto called Bitcoin a Peer-to-Peer Payment System. And so I started reading it. And it just completely blew me away. The elegance, the power of the idea completely blew me away. And so immediately I decided to change research direction. I built a whole new research group at Stanford, focusing on blockchain consensus research. Our focus was on the consensus layer. Yeah, so that's how I got started.
Wow, that's super interesting. I mean, just the fact that every phone, so even this phone right here, uses the algorithm that you developed. I mean, can you only imagine if Babylon then becomes the thing that everybody uses for Bitcoin staking? You might be onto something here. So take us from that moment where, because obviously I just heard of Babylon only a couple of years ago, and you talked about this idea, and sort of the first initial thing was this idea of time stamping. So thinking about that elegance of Bitcoin and Satoshi's paper and just what then clicked for you and then made you realize, how can we use this for additional security? Because we think of Bitcoin only as a proof of work system, right? And of course, the vast majority of these blockchain mechanisms for consensus use proof of stake now instead. So what was the moment that kind of gave you that aha, like, wait a minute, there's something that we could do with Bitcoin to kind of give an extra layer of security? Maybe explain timestamping a little bit more in depth.
Yeah. So in Nakamoto's white paper, in fact, he mentioned this word almost in the beginning of the paper. He said, what I want to create here is a decentralized timestamping server. So why does he say that? Well, if you think about it, what is a blockchain? A blockchain is about ordering a sequence of events, then ordering that everybody agrees on. Well, what is ordering? Ordering is basically putting timestamp on events. And so what he's creating with Bitcoin is a timestamping server. But what is he timestamping? He's timestamping Bitcoin payment transactions. Okay. So Bitcoin is a particular application payment system, but it's also a blockchain. And so our idea was, hey, you spend all this power, all this energy on timestamping Bitcoin transaction, but since you already timestamp Bitcoin transaction, can you also use those timestamp to timestamp other events by pretending that those events are also Bitcoin transactions, but not payment transactions? And so that was the idea, that we say, hey, since other blockchains may not have this level of security of Bitcoin, their timestamps are not very reliable because those timestamps can be fake because there was no such huge amount of energy and work behind it. And so instead of just trusting the signatures of the validator who can actually fake the timestamp, we add on top of that a level of security, which is the Bitcoin timestamp. And so this is sort of the starting point of our project Babylon.
So what I'm curious as a follow-up to that, many people who just anecdotally hear off in the distance like Bitcoin staking might think to themselves, wait a minute, is this similar to when Ethereum did a hard fork and then they went to proof of stake? Is Bitcoin doing a hard fork and doing proof of stake for Bitcoin? It's not. So can you kind of just explain from a high level perspective, what is Bitcoin staking?
Yeah. So, hey, by the way, we were just talking about, by the way, Jordan, nice meeting you. Bitcoin timestamping and Bitcoin staking is actually two separate protocols, okay, that we built. First, timestamping that you heard 2 years ago at East Denver, and now focusing on the Bitcoin staking is a newer thing, okay? So maybe let me explain a bit the difference between the two before I jump right into Bitcoin staking. Now, timestamping, as I mentioned, is borrowing the security of Bitcoin, okay? There's no hard fork of Bitcoin. Bitcoin remains as it is. We're just using it as a timestamping server to timestamp proof of stake transactions, okay? Now, one advantage of Bitcoin is that it's really secure, okay? However, there's one drawback, all right, which is Bitcoin is also very slow. It's not very fast. Every block comes in 10 minutes. So therefore, these timestamps, they don't come very fast, okay? And so whereas timestamping offers a kind of a slow form but very strong security, it doesn't add to the very fast confirmation of proof of stake chains security. And so we came up with this idea of Bitcoin staking is essentially to take all this Bitcoin, the asset now, not the chain, the asset, to add to this staking layer to provide this fast confirmation security. So you can think of, we're using Bitcoin two ways. One, slow, but using a timestamp, and second, fast, which is using the asset as a staking layer.
So I just want to dig into the tech a little bit more. So for the timestamping, is that done through light clients where the proof of stake network is then kind of figuring out like what block it's actually going to be on the Bitcoin chain? And then I kind of want to let you weigh in on that before I get to another question about the staking. But
yes, that's right. So any blockchain, right, is the most important part, and one of the most important part, which is actually neglected by most people, is this idea of a client. Because the client is the one that is providing information on the blockchain. A blockchain without client is a useless blockchain. So here in the timestamping protocol, the client of a standard client of a blockchain, in addition to observing what's happening on the local blockchain, is also opening up a so-called light client, as you mentioned, to Bitcoin, so that it can read these timestamps and combine this timestamp information with the information reads from its native blockchain in order to come to a good conclusion as to what transactions are confirmed.
Yeah, that was one of the things I really remember from seeing your presentation and just looking at the links, like going to the Bitcoin, chain itself. So I just wanted to make sure that anybody who's watching or listening understood exactly how timestamping worked. Now, for the staking, obviously, one of the challenges that we come into with Bitcoin is that it's not a smart contract chain, right? It's very limited because you have to deal with the script, which has very limited programmability. So what was that like to try and architect a staking primitive using Bitcoin and that level of, scripting to try then to orchestrate all of this to connect to a proof of stake chain?
Yeah. So maybe I can review a little bit on how staking works on a proof of stake chain with smart contract. For example, Ethereum. Okay. So in Ethereum, there's a staking contract. Okay, so whenever you stake on Ethereum, there's a contract to enter into, and that contract is described through the smart contract layer. The contract basically says that, okay, I'm going to lock your fund for a certain duration of time, okay, or until you decide to unbond. During this time, your fund is safe, except if the validator that you delegate the fund to, or if you're the validator yourself, does something bad, then part of this fund will be slashed. Okay, so this slashing is super important for proof of stake because if there's no slashing, then nothing is at stake. Then you're not really providing security because there's no risk. If there's no risk, there's no security. Because the risk is what makes sure that the staker and the validator is honest. They do the right thing for the protocol. All right, so therefore the key here is two functionalities of such a contract. One is locking, and two is slashing. Okay. Now we want to do the same thing on Bitcoin, right? Because we want to make Bitcoin a staking asset. Now, locking turns out no problem. Bitcoin, although it doesn't have a smart contract, it does have a scripting language. Otherwise, you can't describe payment system. And the scripting language has an opcode called relative time lock, and that locks the fund. Okay, so we use that, no problem. So we can emulate the locking functionality. But the biggest problem is slashing, because slashing actually requires getting evidence from the proof of stake blockchain and processing that evidence to make sure the fund is slashed on Bitcoin. But Bitcoin doesn't have a smart contract, so it doesn't know, whoa, something bad happened on the proof of stake chain. That's the biggest challenge. And so we figure out a way, which is quite cool actually, to use cryptography, okay, to enable that functionality. Now that sounds very vague. It sounds like I'm using a lot of big words for that. But so let me, if I may, spend 1 minute, just 1 minute, explaining how that works. Actually, it's 1 minute explainable. Okay, so here's the deal, all right? So it turns out that the most important slashing event is called double spend. So actually, this is already mentioned in Nakamoto's white paper. The whole point of a blockchain protocol is to prevent double spend, okay? So the slashing event is when a validator tries to double sign 2 blocks. That's the proof of stake version of double spend, okay? So we created a very interesting signature scheme. So what's a signature scheme in cryptography? Signature scheme means that you sign something, then you don't know, you can't emulate the signature, right? So the private key is secure, even though you sign something. So we designed a scheme which have this property, but it has another extra property, which is if you sign something similar twice, like 2 blocks, then your private key get extracted. And then anyone who extract that private key can go and spend the slashing amount that you specified on the Bitcoin contract. So that's how we emulate the slashing functionality on Bitcoin, even without smart contract.
Wow, that's a really unique solution, and really interesting just how you're able to kind of overcome some of the shortcomings of not having a smart contract enabled network to do these really unique things. Well, Well, I mean, the staking has obviously really taken off. I think you guys have close to like 57,000 Bitcoins like deposited somewhere around close to $6 billion worth of value that Babylon's captured. And I will tell you, I'm a user of the product myself. And I feel like one of the things that really is going to allow Bitcoin to kind of progress in a significant way is just DeFi. All of the things that you can do now by having sort of that liquid staking token from doing that deposit, locking up your Bitcoin securely, then having this LST that you can use to earn yield and do so many incredible things. Was that always part of the plan, or was this kind of you guys were, as you were developing the protocol for staking, these things just kind of natively popped up over time?
Yeah. So, if I am not honest with you, I would say, hey, this is all part of our plan. We planned this out from day one. But honestly, when you build a technology, you kind of pretty much focus on a certain layer of the protocol. Okay. And we built this staking layer. Now, only after we built the staking layer, then other people realize, hey, Babylon has a staking layer on Bitcoin. So when Ethereum has a staking layer, what was the first product? One of the first protocol built on Ethereum staking layer was Lido. So then people realize, hey, we can do the same thing on this Bitcoin staking layer. Now, in hindsight, hey, we should have thought of that when we started this whole project. But to be honest about it, we did not, okay? We did not. So these things, sometimes when you have not built something yet, it's still on a paper, it's very different from the fact that you already have a prototype or you already have a real system. Then people can start thinking more concretely on how you can do about it. So it evolved in a pretty organic way. It's not really a grand master plan that we had from day one.
Well, as a scientist, I'm sure you know the idea of emergence, and this is clearly a great example of sometimes things that just kind of come out of nowhere that you wouldn't have expected as things continue to evolve. So really interesting. Thinking about where you guys are now in terms of the roadmap in Babylon and what you're thinking about for the future, where is this all going? What are some of the things that you're excited about just in terms of the Bitcoin space, broadly speaking, what Babylon has unlocked, things that maybe you guys were thinking about for future products on the roadmap? What does this look like? Where's this all going for you and everybody else at Babylon?
Yeah, that's super interesting. So I would like to mention 2 points here in terms of our technology roadmap. So I'm a technologist, I'm a researcher. So I would like to focus our discussion today on the technology roadmap and the research roadmap. So if you think about it, in networking, when we build networks, we usually build network not as a monolithic object, but in terms of layers, okay? Layers. So for example, in a network, there's a physical layer, there's a networking layer, there's the end-to-end layer, and so that allows different protocols to focus on different layers. People work on different layers. Otherwise, everyone working on the whole thing is very complicated. So what happens now, what we're seeing is that in some sense, there's the emergence of a staking layer on Bitcoin. And so that enables people to build very interesting things on top of the staking layer. A good example is what you already mentioned, which is liquid staking. Liquid staking is a protocol or protocols that are built on top of this Bitcoin staking layer that we built. Okay, so we view our task, okay, from a research and technology development point of view, is to make our basic protocol in such a way that people are easy to build these applications on top of the staking layer in such a way that we extend this basic trustlessness of the staking layer. So a very important point that I have not mentioned, but maybe just alluded to, is that our protocol is entirely trustless, which means that there's no third party involved with handling the Bitcoin asset. It's always self-custodial, only / if a cryptographically verifiable thing happened. So there's no human subjectivity on deciding, oh, your money should be slashed now. Okay, so it's a very powerful. I think it's a very powerful concept, and so we would like to extend this to an upper level stack to sort of extend the trustlessness as far as possible. So, for example, for LST right now, there are actually trust assumptions beyond the Babylon staking trust assumption, and we want to remove or reduce that by building more interesting technology.
I guess last question that I would have before we wrap things up would be, there's different competitors in like the Bitcoin staking space, but none seem to be anywhere close to as unique as what you guys are doing. Can you just very high level explain why you guys are different compared to some of the others out there like Stacks?
Yeah, I would say two things, two reasons, I think. We don't mention names, of course, but we talk about two things from a technological and also from an ecosystem point of view. I would say it's a combination. One, the technological is, I think we're the only Bitcoin staking protocol. In fact, we're the first Bitcoin staking protocol, but there are many others who claim that Bitcoin staking protocol, which really support this true collateralization, which is slashing in a trustless way. I do not think any other protocol has this functionality because it was actually very hard to build, very hard to come up with this idea and build it. Okay, that's number one. So we have this, I believe, technological advantage. And slashing to me makes the staking providing true security and therefore sustainable long term. Otherwise, if you have no slashing, then really on the long term, nobody will pay you yield for the staking. So it's not sustainable. Okay, that's number one. And I think the interest you mentioned is really people believing in sort of the long-term sustainability of this sort of true collateralization. Okay, number one. Number two, very important, is that we built this protocol not to build another Bitcoin L2. So we're not building a specific L2. In fact, we're trying to make this technology, this protocol, available for any blockchain or any L1, L2 that wants Bitcoin staking security. So this allows us to open up the source of yield to many, many blockchains, and therefore make a significant TVL, like you mentioned, sustainable now from an ecosystem point of view, not only from a technology point of view. So I think the combination of the two, I think, makes a project quite unique in the space.
No arguing that. I think that Babylon has built something truly unique, and we're definitely very honored to have you on here with us, Professor Say, to explain all this, to talk about Babylon, how this vision has been architected from the beginning, even with some unintended yet very positive consequences, admittedly, right? So thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and wisdom with us. Thank you for everybody who's tuned in to watch this episode of Decentral Lounge. What's the best place for people to reach out to you or to team members? How do they get in touch if they want to learn more about Babylon?
Yeah, I think our website, babylonlabs.io, that's the Babylon Labs website. I think that website contains almost all the information about the project. And yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll make sure to link those and make sure, we'll put your X handle up there too, so people can follow along.
Oh, yes, that's right. X handle.
And
X handle, correct.
We'll make sure all those are linked. And thank you again for everybody who's watching. We'll see you on the next Decentral Lounge. Take care, everybody.